Hello and welcome to another episode of Top3Tech. I'm Jerry Reese. You should know me by now. If not, hello. But anyways, today we're going to be reviewing a brand new GPU that I have got my hands on. I've only reviewed one other one like this, but it is the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra, the GeForce RTX 3070 Ti. I'm not sure if it's limited hash rate or not. If I find out, I'll let you guys know. But before I get started on the unboxing and the benchmarks, I just wanted to show you I had to purchase this dude, or dudette. Well, I think it would be a girl because you plug things into it. Anyways, it is 750 watt Supernova EVGA PSU. I had to purchase it to get this card. Thanks, Newegg. That's something for a different day. We don't have to talk about it right now. But anyways, let's get started into this unboxing. Started, just want to let you guys know this was sealed, and I did cut the seal just so it could be easier for me to unbox this for you guys. But I haven't seen the contents inside, so this will be my first step into it. Ooh, nice. This will be my first step into it along with you guys. So let's check it out. All right, look, it has a nice little cutout, nice little slots. Before we go in there, let's check out installation guide, GeForce GTX. GeForce RTX. Oh, it opens like this. Ooh, like those old magazines, huh? Look at that. Damn. Crazy. What else is in there? Oh, what's this? Oh, nice. It comes with a little, it looks like a decal. We'll figure out where to place that. Did you guys see it? You guys get a good view? Probably not. Alright. Sorry about that. Jeez. Here, let me step in and get a better view. Sorry about that, guys. It says powered by EVGA. Sorry about that. Let's see what else is in here. Alright, that looks like that's about it on that. This little black cutout foam. It is in an anti-static bag. Sorry, try to grab this as gently as I could. Ooh, it's a thick boy. Here it is, inside the anti-static bag. No padding, just anti-static. Let's take a closer look. And of course, we have a triple fan design on the front. If you look closely here, you see the EVGA emblem, the E, all on the fans. I think it's pretty interesting how they do this intense details on this card. The little things count, you know. On the bottom right, it does say GeForce RTX and then EVGA and the LED bar in the middle. Of course, we got this line through the card, and it does measure 300 millimeters. It has some vents back there too, so it can cool off. And of course, we got some more heat vents here, some heat pipes. We got another radiator here. EVGA GeForce RTX 3070 Ti lights up. It is a 16 pin, and as you can see here, there's a overclock and quiet switch on. Of course, we test everything in overclock mode, and that lights up, and so does the For the Win 3. We have 3 display ports and 1 HDMI. The display ports are 1.4 and then the HDMI is 2.1. And then we got more of the heat pipes right there. And all in all, it's a nice card. One of the best things about reviewing cards is that you gotta have them on hand. And most of these are gonna sell, but I happen to have these all at the same time, so I might as well compare them. Of course, the 3070 Ti. Right here we got an XFX 6600 Swift 210. We got the Gigabyte Gaming RX 6600, the XT. This is my cousin's ASRock Phantom Gaming 6700 XT. That's my Sapphire Pulse 6800, and then that's my Nitro Plus 6800 XT. So pretty much all we're missing so far in this lineup is the 6900 XT, which my cousin has, which is why he let me use his 6700, and then the 6500 whenever that comes out. And then right here we got the 3070 Ti. So we'll be comparing it between these. Sorry about the little mess down there, you guys. So look at that. Look how that looks compared to the 66, compared to the 6600 XT, compared to the 6700 XT, compared to the 6800, and then of course the 6800 XT. They're both thick boys. I think the 3070 Ti is a little thicker though. I mean, jeez, look at that. See if you can see the thickness between these cards. Yeah, look, it towers over the 6600. Let's see. Oh yeah, it's definitely, let's see, a little taller than the 6800 XT. And if we're going by front designs, which one would I say is my favorite? This is a really tough one. I'd probably say, I like how this has the whole RGB right here, but I'd probably say the Phantom Gaming, that front looks amazing. It feels like Mortal Kombat, you know, when you climb the ladder after each boss. But the XFX, to me, it's too plain, too black. But I feel like since it's a smaller GPU, they'll probably put them into smaller cases anyways, where you can't see them. I do like the design of the Gigabyte just because it's a different color. I always like when they go to different color schemes. The ASRock Phantom Gaming has a similar design to the EVGA. It does have a heat vent. Actually, all these cards have heat vents. But I don't like the ridiculous wording on this. What does it say? Fast, mysterious, and unbeatable? Sure. You know what? That is actually a good card. Gosh, I can't stop stuttering. Sorry about that, you guys. We got the Sapphire Pulse. Those are similar as well. I like the Pulse. I do wish it was RGB. I wish all these cards had RGB in the back, but you know, whatever. They are worth a lot. And everyone always, not everyone, a good majority of people hate when I say that. Then we got that Nitro Plus. Wow. But my favorite out of these would be the Nitro Plus because not only does it have a different paint scheme, but it also looks nicer to me. And it lights up on the RGB there. Like I said, you're paying a lot for these cards. You might as well get everything you can. Here we have them side by side. Well, you know what I mean. This is what you would see if you had plugged them into your GPU. This one does not have RGB. The Sapphire Pulse does not have RGB. And as you can see, these cards, well, the 3070 Ti is pretty thick compared to the 6800 XT, but it's not as long. It's probably as long as a little bit longer than the 6600 XT, it looks like. And not as long as the 6800. So, what you're giving up in length, you're getting in width. Or girth. I don't know. This is getting too crazy. Now that we have done the unboxing and the comparisons to the GPUs, let's get this bad boy inside the Top3Tech PC. It doesn't look too bad, but of course we gotta plug it in and turn the power on just so we can see how it looks like with everything complete. Wow, that looks amazing. I'm not gonna lie, EVGA does make some nice cards. Look at that. Let's get that bigger picture. What do you guys think? It's one of my favorite looking cards. But let's go ahead and head on to the benchmarks. That way we can see how it performs. Now we have the moment of truth. We are in the benchmarks. But before we get started, let me go ahead and introduce the Top3Tech PC specs. We do have an Asus X570 TUF Gaming Plus Wi-Fi motherboard. It is paired with the Ryzen 7 5800X. We have 32 gigabytes of Corsair engines, 3200 megahertz RAM, and of course we will be testing the EVGA RTX 3070 Ti for the Win 3 Ultra Gaming. It has a 1860 megahertz boost clock, about a 44 megahertz difference from the 3070, give or take. The 8GB GDDR6 memory. It has the Ampere architecture, only one HDMI 2.1 port or slot, and then 3 display ports at 1.4, and then the minimum recommended PSU for this would be a 750 watt PSU. To start off the benchmarks, we have the 3D Mark benchmark. This is the Time Spy variant, which is a DirectX 12 version. The max temperature sit today was 70 degrees. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had a Time Spy score of 16,632. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had a score of 14,309, beating out the MSI Ventex 3X 3070 Ti. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had a 14,294 Time Spy score. The Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT had a Time Spy score of 13,031. The bottom of the 6700 XT group is the Sapphire Pulse with 11,386. The MSI Gaming X 6600 XT had a score of 9,905. Then we have the PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 with the 8,830 score. And the XFX Speedster Swift 210 6600 had a Time Spy score of 8,366. When we go on to Firestrike, the DirectX 11 version, the Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had a Firestrike score of 37,708. Sapphire Pulse 6800 had a Firestrike score of 34,251. The card we're testing today, the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti, maxed out at 70 degrees and had a Firestrike score of 32,182, beating out the MSI Ventex 3X 3070 Ti. The Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT leads the group with a 30,583 Firestrike score. On the bottom of the group is the Pulse again, and it's at 28,134. MSI Gaming X 6600 XT has a score of 25,868. The XFX Speedster Swift 210 6600 has a Firestrike score of 21,261. Then we have the PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 with a Firestrike score of 20,662. When we move over to MSI Kombuster 1440p, the max temperature sit today was 71 degrees. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 somehow beats out the two 3070 Ti's with the 66 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 64 frames per second. The MSI Ventex 3X 3070 Ti had 62 frames per second. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 51 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 43 frames per second. The XFX Merc 319 6700 XT had 39 frames per second. The PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 had 38 frames per second. The Asus ROG Strix leads the 6700 XT group with 38 frames per second. Then we have the PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 with 38 frames per second. We go down to the Power Color Hellhound 6700 XT with 36 frames per second. We have the MSI Gaming X 5700 XT with 35 frames per second. We have the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT at 31 frames per second. Then we have the XFX Swift 210 6600 at 24 frames per second. When we switch on over to 1080p, the card still hit 71 degrees. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 had 80 frames per second. EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 77 frames per second. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 57 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 49 frames per second. The PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 had 46 frames per second. The XFX Merc 319 still led the 6700 XT group at 44 frames per second. The Power Color Hellhound 6700 XT had 41 frames per second, tying the MSI Gaming X 5700 XT. And then the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT 36 frames per second. And then the XFX Swift 210 6600 had 27 frames per second. And I'm sorry, the Asus ROG Strix was actually the last 6700 XT with 37 frames per second. When we hop on over to Gears 5 Ultra Preset Benchmark at 1440p, the maximum temperatures hit was 70 degrees. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 120.8 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 105.5 frames per second, barely beating out the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti at 103.5 frames per second. We have the Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT leading the group with a 90.4 frames per second. We have the XFX Merc 319 6700 XT with 77 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 5700 XT had 71 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 had 70.6 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 6600 XT had 66.6 frames per second. The PNY Accelerated Gaming Rebel 3060 had 62.1 frames per second. Then the XFX Swift 210 6600 had 52.8 frames per second. When we switch it over to the 1080p, the max temperature hit was 68 degrees. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT hit 142.9 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 142.7 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 140.3 frames per second. The Asus ROG Strix leads the 6700 XT group with 129.7 frames per second. On the bottom of the group is the XFX Merc 319 6700 XT at 108.7 frames per second. We have the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT at 101.9 frames per second. We have the MSI Gaming X 5700 XT at 98 frames per second. We have the PNY Accelerated Gaming Rebel 3060 at 82.7 frames per second. We have the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 at 81 frames per second. The XFX Swift 210 6600 was at 79.8 frames per second. Then we head on over to our next benchmark, the Forza Horizon 4 Ultra Benchmark at 1440p. The max temperature that this card hit was 58 degrees. We have the Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT at 241.5 frames per second. We have the Sapphire Pulse 6800 at 211.8 frames per second. We have the Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT at 178.7 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 172.8 frames per second. Then we have the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 at 154.9 frames per second. We have the MSI Gaming X 6600 XT at 151.2 frames per second. The Gigabyte Gaming OC 6600 XT at 148.8 frames per second. The XFX Merc 319 6700 XT was at 138.2 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 5700 XT at 126 frames per second. The XFX Swift 210 6600 at 121.2 frames per second. And then we had the PNY Accelerated Gaming Rebel 3060 at 109.4 frames per second. When we switch over to 1080p, the Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 286.6 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 261.6 frames per second. The Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT had 225.8 frames per second. The MSI Ventus 3X beats out the EVGA for the Win 3 3070 Ti at 208.3 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 206.9 frames per second. The Gigabyte Gaming OC 6600 XT had 202.6 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 had 178.6 frames per second. The XFX Swift 210 6600 had 169.8 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 5700 XT had 160 frames per second. And then the PNY Accelerated Gaming Rebel 3060 had 136.4 frames per second. And then for the Merc, that was on day one drivers, so that's probably why it had bad frames. We hop on over to Forza Horizon 5 Extreme Benchmark at 1440p. The max temp that this card hit was 61 degrees. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 94.6 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 93.1 frames per second, beating out the MSI Ventus. The ASRock Phantom Gaming 6700 XT had 86.6 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 85.3 frames per second. The Gigabyte Gaming OC 6600 XT had 70.7 70.7 frames per second, and the XFX Swift 210 6600 had 60.1 frames per second. When we tried it out at 1080p, the max temp hit was 59 degrees. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 107.8 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 107.7 frames per second. By 0.1 frames it lost. The ASRock Phantom Gaming 6700 XT had 104.8 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 97.5 frames per second. The Gigabyte Gaming OC 6600 XT had 85 frames per second. And the XFX Swift 210 6600 had 75.3 frames per second. The next benchmark that we try out is the Shadow of the Tomb Raider, highest benchmark settings at 1440p. The max temperature hit was 70 degrees. This game was a little toasty, but the Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 156 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 134 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 127 frames per second. The ASRock Phantom Gaming 6700 XT had 109 frames per second, and the XFX Swift 210 6600 had 66 frames per second. When we hop on over to 1080p, the max temperature hit was also 70 degrees. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 225 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 193 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 183 frames per second. The ASRock Phantom Gaming 6700 XT had 157 frames per second, and the XFX Swift 210 6600 had 104 frames per second. We head on over to Assassin's Creed Valhalla Ultra High benchmark at 1440p. The results are pretty surprising. I guess this is more of an AMD game, but let's go ahead and hop right into it. Of course, the max temps hit was 63 degrees, which is pretty cool. But the Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 108 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 96 frames per second. The ASRock Phantom Gaming 6700 XT had 93 frames per second. The XFX Swift 210 6600 had 83 frames per second. And the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 81 frames per second. Not good. I kept testing it and no bueno. When we hop on over to 1080p, the maximum temperatures that were hit were 63 degrees. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT hit 140 frames. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 hit 125 frames. The ASRock Phantom Gaming 6700 XT hit 121 frames. The XFX Swift 210 6600 hit 108 frames. And the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti hit 99 frames. Then we hop on over to Call of Duty Cold War Ultra Campaign at 1440p. The max temperatures hit on this card was 68 degrees. I do recommend DLSS on this game if you need more of a performance boost. It does look pretty good still. But the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 109 frames per second. With DLSS on, it had 148. The MSI Ventus 3X 3070 Ti had 102 frames per second. DLSS on 135. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 131 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 had 91 frames per second, with DLSS on 118. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 118 frames per second. The Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT had 99 frames per second. The PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 had 67 frames per second, with DLSS on 92 frames per second. The XFX Merc 319 is on the bottom of the list with 86 frames per second. MSI Gaming X 5700 XT had 72 frames per second. The Gigabyte Gaming Overclock 6600 XT had 67 frames per second. And the XFX Swift 210 6600 had 58 frames per second. When we tested at 1080p, the coldest that this card hit was 67 degrees. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 149 frames per second, with DLSS on it had 177. The MSI Ventus 3X 3070 Ti had 139 frames per second, with DLSS on 165 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 had 129 frames per second, with DLSS on 161. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 156 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 150 frames per second. The Power Color Red Devil 6700 XT had 146 frames per second.
The PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 had 93 frames per second with DLSS on 116. The XFX Merc 319 6700 XT had 115 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 5700 XT had 94 frames per second. The Gigabyte Gaming OC 6600 XT had 88 frames per second. The XFX Swift 210 6600 had 86 frames per second. Then we head on over to Call of Duty Warzone Caldera, high settings at 1440p. Before we go any further, just going to explain that Warzone is a spontaneous game, so the results are as close as I could get them. Some might be higher, some might be lower, but this is what I averaged. The highest temperature that I hit in this game was 68 degrees. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 163 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 120 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 112 frames per second. The ASRock Phantom Gaming 6700 XT had 110 frames per second. The Gigabyte Gaming OC 6600 XT had 91 frames per second. And the XFX Swift 210 6600 had 76 frames per second. When we try out Warzone at 1080p, the highest that this card hit was 69. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT had 203 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 had 179 frames per second. The ASRock Phantom Gaming 6700 XT had 151 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti had 142 frames per second. The Gigabyte Gaming OC 6600 XT had 123 frames per second. And the XFX Swift 210 6600 had 102 frames per second. And of course, I didn't try DLSS on this because the first time I used DLSS, it was really laggy, so I haven't used it since. Then we head on over to the Cyberpunk Ultra preset at 1440p. The max temperature hit was 69 degrees. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT hit 83 frames per second. In this game, I recommend DLSS too. It doesn't take too much of a quality hit. Surprisingly, the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 hit 55 frames per second, and with DLSS on, it hit 83 frames. For some reason, it outperformed the EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti, which hit 40 frames per second with DLSS 74. The MSI Ventus 3X 3070 Ti hit 54 frames per second. With DLSS, it hit 72. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 hit 59 frames per second. The Sapphire Nitro Plus 6700 XT hit 57 frames per second. And then the Asus ROG Strix 6700 XT hit 47 frames per second. The PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 hit 32 frames per second. With DLSS on, it hit 44 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 5700 XT hit 40 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 6600 XT hit 32 frames per second. And the XFX Swift 210 6600 hit 22 frames per second. When we try out Cyberpunk Ultra preset at 1080p, the highest temperature this card hit was also 69 degrees. The MSI Ventus 3X 3070 Ti came in first with 87 frames per second. When you add DLSS, it hit 106 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 Ti hit 66 frames per second. With DLSS, it hit 100. The Sapphire Nitro Plus SE 6800 XT hit 91 frames per second. The Sapphire Pulse 6800 hit 91 frames per second. The Sapphire Nitro Plus 6700 XT hit 83 frames per second. The EVGA for the Win 3 Ultra 3070 hit 71 frames per second. With DLSS on, it hit 81 frames per second. The Power Killer Hellhound 6700 XT hit 73 frames per second. The PNY Accelerate Gaming Rebel 3060 hit 51 frames per second. With DLSS on, it hit 69 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 5700 XT hit 62 frames per second. The MSI Gaming X 6600 XT hit 60 frames per second. And the Gigabyte Gaming OC 6600 XT hit 49 frames per second. And the XFX Swift 210 6600 hit 39 frames per second.
Okay, so in conclusion, I think it's a pretty great card. If we're going by looks, since that's what the unboxing was, it looks great. Like I said, the precision and detail that they put into it is pretty dope. I like the LED bar, fits all the way across the top. The EVGA on the bottom right used to be like a red color, now it's all black. So that's nice. By looks, I agree that's one of the best looking cards I've seen. But performance-wise, it's not too bad. This card was around the $940 range. That's around 6700 XT price. And I'd probably recommend this over 6700 XT right now, if you can get one. Sorry about that, guys. But yeah, it's a great card. It was top 3 in most of the
most of the benchmarks, so that's not too bad. And then the 6800 is pretty close to it in specs, but that one is probably around 1100, 1200 now. They were 1000 before, but the prices have gone up. The 6800 XT is around $1,300 and up. But if you have a micro center, you can find anything cheaper that performs better, then go for it. But for $900, that's a pretty good price range for 3070 Ti. I would recommend it. I recommend this card. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys have a great day, and make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Peace.
Thank you for watching another video from Top 3 Entertainment. I hope you hit like and subscribe. Also, I'm going to have a recommended playlist, a recommended video right here, so make sure to click that as well. I appreciate you guys tuning in, whether it be to the Top 3 Tech, Top 3 Gaming, or the Why Not Me podcast. You guys are dope. I hope to see you guys in the next video. And of course, let's grow this thing together. Peace. Peace. Peace.